Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another amazing episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Thanks for tuning in today. Today's episode is going to feature my interview with Andrew Levenson of Root+Beta, a marketing partner to the agricultural industry that seeks every day to be a growth catalyst for ag brands. I came to know Andrew through his work supporting John Deere dealer groups and their marketing and branding strategies related to M&A investments and consolidation. And once we connected, I really wanted to get him on the show. You know, there's so many parallels between the work that we do of realizing value of an acquisition through better integration with what Andrew and the team at Root+Beta do by working to tell, compelling stories that bring customers along on the journey and help them understand the new benefits available to them when their local dealer grows or is acquired. And also, in the process, honoring the legacy of those legacy brands that have served rural communities for years, absent an acquisition, and that really have meaningful impact and gravity in the communities where they've been based. And all along the way, ensuring a balance between supporting your customers, of course, and you want to make sure the M&A is beneficial to them, but you also need to make sure it's additive to your business and not lose sight of supporting your employees, who are the daily stewards of your brand and the service you provide, and they're critical to the success of any transaction. So in our discussion, we talk a lot about what's happening among John Deere dealers in regards to M&A today, what we might expect over the next couple of years as the down cycle continues, and we hopefully pull the nose up, the risks of not getting marketing and branding right during an acquisition and some things to think about, customer retention risk, and a whole lot more. It was a wonderful episode, and I love having people who are doing similar work, advising agribusinesses on M&A, but in very specific niche sort of capacities. And so this was a wonderful opportunity to have Andrew and a new perspective on the show. So I think you're going to enjoy it. There's a lot here for you. I would listen close and take notes. And with that, let's get over to my conversation with Andrew Levenson of Root+Beta. Andrew, welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. We came to know each other through LinkedIn and social media. I had a guest on last year who had managed an acquisition, a merger within the ag equipment dealership space. That's a client that you had advised in the past. This, of course, is Chris Rupiper at formerly Prairie State Tractor, now part of Heritage. But we came to know one another, and I found your focus and your background on what you do in the agribusiness space really interesting. So I'm happy to have you on the show today. You work for an agency called Root+Beta, I believe, or Root+Beta. I definitely know Root and Beta is involved. But maybe can you jump in and tell us who you all are, what you do, and kind of also how that practice has evolved around supporting ag equipment dealers and more specifically John Deere dealers?
Yeah, no, happy to share more about who we are. So I'm the vice president of Root+Beta. As you said, we are kind of a niche agency with a very niche focus. We primarily today work with some of the largest John Deere dealer groups. We're actually the largest independent agency working with farm equipment dealer groups in general. And primarily what we do is manage marketing. So that typically looks like paid media, digital advertising, traditional advertising. But I think over the last 5 or 6 years or so, that has really evolved to be more comprehensive outside of just the marketing space. A big focus of ours is kind of bridging the gap between marketing and sales. And so we are very focused on CRM, on lead generation, on making sure that our dealers and clients are seeing an actual ROI from their marketing efforts. And then as the mergers and acquisitions space and push has grown with many of our dealers as well, we've had an expanded focus there, helping advise and work up and consult on advertising efforts around mergers and acquisitions.
And did the agency, did it start off exclusively working with dealer groups, or was it to more, not agnostic, but more ag general sort of focus, or what's the breadcrumbs that, for me, I understand the riches are in the niches, right? You pick your lane, you pick the thing that's unmet in the market, you get really good at it, and you become the group of people that solve that problem for that set of clients. But it doesn't usually start that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it did for you all, but I'd love to hear how that evolved.
Yeah, we started actually in the automotive industry. So our founder and current CEO, Tim Whitley, had a history in the automotive space and had been working with car dealer groups. And what he had realized at the time, and this was probably close to 16 years ago, is that there's a lot of overlap between automotive advertising and farm equipment advertising, especially when you're talking the kind of compact sector of farm equipment. And so what he had realized is that the farm equipment space was pacing 5 to 10 years behind the automotive space in terms of marketing efforts and tactics. And so he started taking a lot of what was working in the automotive space and applying that to the farm equipment space. We got kind of our first foray into farm equipment by working with Greenway Equipment, which is one of the largest John Deere dealer groups in the nation. And they're still our client today. We've been working with them for over 15 years. And since then, we've expanded our efforts across some of the largest John Deere dealer groups in the nation. And that's kind of how we got our start.
It's fascinating. And it's exclusively John Deere dealer group. So it's not working with other OEMs.
Correct.
No, that's fantastic. So, obviously the business is much broader than M&A, though clearly M&A is a headline trend among equipment dealer groups. A lot of the work that you do is helping to create, as I understand it, create brand strategies and storytelling around that consolidation of the ag equipment dealers. Panning back from marketing specifically, so we're going to go deep into your area of expertise here in a bit, but panning back from marketing specifically, what are you all seeing as it relates to the pace and the size of merger and acquisition deals among the ag equipment dealers? And then even, more timely, what do you expect to see as we work through this current down cycle?
Yeah, great question. I would say over the last 3 to 5 years, especially, I would say kind of post-COVID, we have seen a huge increase in mergers and acquisitions, specifically in the John Deere space. I mean, that's obviously happening outside of John Deere as well. Other OEMs are also increasing their mergers and acquisitions, but we've seen, like I said, a very large increase, specifically in dealers acquiring or merging with dealers that are very far away from their AOR. So, for instance, a dealer in Kansas acquiring a dealer in Illinois, or a dealer in Missouri acquiring a dealer in New York. That's been an interesting trend that we've noticed recently. I feel like historically we had seen primarily dealers making acquisitions in or near their AOR, a dealer in Missouri acquiring another dealer in Missouri. But I think both the frequency of acquisitions has increased. We've definitely seen that over the last 3 to 5 years. And then I would say, I guess, the style of acquisition has also changed in terms of they're not adjacent anymore to the AOR. They're really, these dealer groups are becoming almost semi-national. They're no longer in 1 or 2 states that are adjacent to one another. They're acquiring or growing really across the nation, sometimes in entirely different regions or entirely different AORs.
Can you define AOR for us?
Yeah, AOR is area of responsibility. So in the Deere space, at least, and I know for other OEMs, dealers are really given an area that they are responsible for from a sales perspective. So that's really their focus area in terms of making their sales. It's
interesting. I mean, I guess you could say that the geographic distribution of your dealer network, if you're a dealer group, it offers some benefits in that there's the economics of farming in different areas, the amount of production, the profitability of that production can vary, and that could sort of fortify your business against some localized weather event or other disruption to the amount or the value of production that occurs there. We had Kyle McMahon from Tractor Zoom on here recently, and one of the things that he highlighted, of course, was that the ag equipment space and the resale side is not necessarily a monolith, because the specifications of a tractor or a combine or an applicator in the Southeast and the Carolinas will be radically different than something that's being used in North Dakota. So it's also interesting that this style of deal, as you said, is changing, because if you get into these wildly different ag use cases, you wonder if they're actually achieving scale with similar types of equipment, if the specs could be so radically different across different geographies. But
yeah, definitely. I think the approach has to change geographically. And I think a big factor in overall a factor that is influencing the increase in these mergers and acquisitions is farm consolidation. And I think expanding the reach of your dealer group in another state or another region in the U.S. can help you really weather farm consolidation in one AOR or in one region. If your farmers and your customers are consolidating, which is happening pretty drastically over the last 20, 30 years, then by expanding to a different region, you're also kind of protecting your book of business.
Yeah. So you talked about the frequency of deals is up, the style of deals is evolving. Have you seen any meaningful trends around the size? I think about several years ago, it was very common to see a dealer that had achieved a 8 to 10, 15 or 20 location sort of footprint. They were the buyer of those, the adjacent territory, 1 or 2 location dealers. We start to see more now of 10 location dealers buying other 10 location dealers, or, in the case of Heritage, it's a tri-party merger, right? Of significant number of locations. So have you seen anything there? Is it still small deals and big deals, or is there anything that's emerging that's surprised you?
There are still small deals and there are still large deals taking place, but I think dealers in general are getting larger. That's Deere's MO, and that's not a secret. That's pretty public. Like, they want fewer dealer groups. I believe that they're looking for like 3 to 5 dealer groups in each state, which is a significant decrease from what they've had over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think the deals generally are getting larger because the dealers are just growing their amount of dealership locations, and they're acquiring larger dealer groups. I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, just like you said, we had dealer groups that were 9 or 10 tops that were acquiring maybe a 1 or 2 top dealer group. And now we're seeing dealer groups who have 20 locations acquiring another 20 location dealer group. And so I think they're growing almost exponentially but there's less mom and pops out there, frankly. If you look, especially at the Deere space, and I think generally at the farm equipment space, there are significantly fewer 1 to 3 top shops than there were 5 or 6 years ago.
Certainly. Yeah. Fair point. Well, let's get in then to marketing and branding specifically. We'll get into your sweet spot here, Andrew. One of the things that we have in common, meaning the business that I run, the business that you're leading as well, is that we're both supporting clients in the process of executing these really significant transactions that need to indicate or signal some level of upside potential, or why would you do it? But concurrently, it comes with very serious downside risk. And I think as external advisors to these businesses, we need to offer value, but we also need to protect against the downside. For us, we help management create integration plans that are derived from why they're doing the deal. And we try to scope integrations relative to what does it take to actually get that value. And it seems so obvious to say, well, let's focus on these key things. And we need to focus on integration because that's how you operationalize the value of your investment. And again, it seems obvious, but we're always competing for very finite amounts of management's time and attention. And I know the risk of what happens when integrations go wrong. The literature is very clear. The lived experience is clear. And so we're always working to put this problem set in front of our clients. In terms of marketing and branding and telling a compelling story, I would imagine there's a lot of parallels there, right?
Yes.
It's really important. You know what happens when you don't get it right. But, how have you found success in getting management's attention? And what are the benefits when folks do this well? Meaning really leaning into the marketing and branding and telling a good story around the acquisition. What do they risk if they get it wrong? And the reason I'm asking you this is, one, I want to learn from you guys, but two, I think we need to help educate listeners around, you're not always going to have an external advisor there to tap you on the shoulder and remind you of something that you're overlooking. So how do we really bake this into how folks think about their consolidation activities and merger activities from a marketing and branding perspective?
Yeah, I think by far the biggest benefit if you can get it right, but also the biggest risk if you get it wrong, is customer retention. Obviously, during an M&A, you want to retain the customers and the clients of the dealer group that you're acquiring or merging with. And in my opinion, that is the biggest benefit and also the biggest risk, either losing those customers that you've built or that dealer group has built over 50, 60 years or longer, or retaining and actually growing that customer base in that AOR. I think the way to do that, and I think the problem that we've seen too, is dealers becoming too corporate. I think as dealers have grown, they really ultimately are kind of becoming corporations. Once you get to the point where you have 40, 50, 60 dealerships, it's difficult to maintain a brand that does not feel corporate. And I think one of the main issues that we've seen is dealers acquiring small to mid-sized dealer groups that the owner is in the dealership every day, and then they're bought out. The owner's not there anymore. They rename the dealership. They do a layoff at those dealerships, and then the community does not take that very well. Things spread fast in small towns. And so a corporation coming in, I think that's the biggest risk from a branding perspective, is trying to maintain ultimately the legacy that the dealership group that you are acquiring has built. A lot of these dealer groups are 100 years old, 60, 70 years old. And so they've really built a legacy. A lot of times that's around a family name as well. And so coming in, especially as an outsider from another state or another region, putting your name, laying off staff, et cetera, there's a lot of branding and PR and marketing that needs to be done around that to not only make sure you're not coming across to the community as a corporation, but you're also, again, maintaining that customer base that the dealer group you're acquiring or merging with has built over the years.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you're saying that, I'm thinking about some of the larger, again, more corporate transactions that we see and hear about, where sometimes clearly you want to retain the business, you also want to grow the business, but sometimes the felt impact of the merger is a well-intentioned, let's streamline the back office.
Yeah.
Right. We're going to have better, more efficient processes that are going to improve our margin per unit of sales. We're going to reduce our cost to serve. There's a better single way of doing this work that currently has been peppered and spread throughout all these different locations. We can consolidate that. That's a rational economic argument for an owner. Yeah. The problem is if that's the only felt impact, if it's not counterbalanced with, and here's what it's going to allow us to do. At scale, we're going to have options to secure and to finance, to service bigger, larger, and different types of equipment. We're going to be able to improve parts availability. We're going to be able to improve the availability of expert technicians to solve novel problems. We're going to be front of the queue for getting those the retrofit technology add-on kits that you're asking for, Mr. Farmer. If you don't have those stories, if it's just about cutting costs out, it's a positive economic impact, probably. It's a felt negative emotional impact, certainly. That's really important. Aside from the customer, and this is sound like a leading question, but to what degree is the marketing and branding also for the employees? Or is it truly externally facing?
Yeah, for For the employees, I would say what we focus on primarily is not necessarily what I would call marketing and branding. I would say that's where public relations really comes in. Many times when we are working with a dealer group who is making a large acquisition or merger, we work really closely with their executive teams and their marketing teams to really formulate communication plans internally. We've seen dealer groups that the employees don't even know the merger acquisition's happening until the public knows about it. And that is really like a worst case scenario. Because again, that's a huge threat to your customer retention. I mean, if you anger your key employees, especially if you're acquiring a fairly large dealer group, I mean, you could really make a pretty negative PR impact in those regions that can affect your retention, because typically your employees are really well connected in the community. So if you anger them or upset them, it's not probably going to end up well for you. So a lot of that, I would say, is not, again, marketing and branding. It's PR, communications, making sure you're informing employees early, informing them often, giving them spaces to express frustration, and also really kind of selling them on why the merger acquisition is good for them, good for their families, good for their community. So I would say, yes, that is really a very important piece of it, and really focused more on the PR side.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
If you're an owner-operator and you've grown to, let's say, you're at 10 or 12 locations, and you're buying an 8-location, a historical friendly competitor, and you've hired you've either got your internal marketing comms people, you've hired an external agency, whatever it is, and if you see that your messaging efforts, they look crisp, they look professional, they look battle tested, ready to go, but they're only talking to the market. And no one is talking about how do we talk to our people. That's a flag that management needs to look out for. That's what I'm hearing here.
Definitely. And I think it's underlooked. I think in many cases, dealers are so focused on the market and on customer retention, they lose sight of their employees and of their staff, which again are a large piece, I think, of a successful M&A.
Yeah. So do you actively work then? So if you all are focusing, if you're helping them in that process of the branding, marketing, branding, storytelling aspect, and then you're obviously coaching and advising them to secure the proper PR resources to also be creating communication plans, creating venues for feedback, supporting employees through the announcement as well. Which message leads typically? Does the employee communications draft off the core messages of the external announcements driven by marketing and branding? Is it vice versa, or is it actually a co-creation of what the messaging is?
Yeah, I think the external communication probably leads. I think typically, looking back at the M&As that we've assisted or consulted on, we'll start with the external communication. Obviously, won't release that externally until we go through that internal process. But typically, those external talking points can also be used internally. There's some things we would add or kind of revise there when you're talking to employees. But I would say typically it's external first, then the internal conversations happen. But what we always want to make sure is that external communication does not happen prior to those internal conversations, because again, I think that's where we have seen the most issues take place, are when that external communication takes place or when there's a leak. I mean, that's happened a decent amount of times too. I don't know that leak is the right phrase necessarily, but when employees do find out about it, even though it hasn't necessarily been formally released internally, that can also cause some issues.
I mean, I think the through line here is you have to take it seriously, because there are some very serious, very real reasons, even with some legal ramifications around why, the tent is pretty small until the tent is full with everybody in the business in terms of who knows what's going on. And it's a very uncomfortable period, right?
Yeah.
When you are sitting there acting publicly as if nothing's different, but privately, you're about to turn things inside out here in the next, 10 to 12 days. But it's not that we can tell everybody everything all the time, but you have to recognize that there's going to need to be a thoughtful time of here's when they actually do need to know. Here's when we're legally allowed to say something. And what are we going to say? Who's going to say it? How are we going to say it? How many times are we going to say it? Where are we going to say it? How do we get in front of people? That's very good counsel. So on the customer retention side, because you've hit that pretty head on, my thoughts here, customer retention risk and defending the existing book of business is of course something that comes up in every deal, right? You'd be reckless to not think about how do we not lose what is already in place. But at the same time, and we've talked about this before, Andrew, two merged businesses, they need to capture more of the market. It's not just about combining the sum of those two and saying, wow, look what we've created, because likely there's some premium paid to acquire a business. If there's a premium paid, but it's just 1 + 1 = 2, and no incremental value is realized beyond maybe some of those efficiencies, then what have you actually done, right? You haven't actually created any new value. So you have this dual challenge in an acquisition of we need to retain our book of business while also creating the conditions by which the net book of business will increase. So for you, how do you set the stage for mitigating retention risk, meaning we're not going to hemorrhage customers? That's front page above the fold. But at the same time, creating a marketing strategy that's going to protects the customers of the legacy business while also creating something interesting and captivating for the market such that new people may want to participate as customers in that new business. And that feels like those are two very different challenges. Saying something that the legacy people hear while also saying something that the folks that don't transact with you today will also be listening to.
Yeah. In terms of growing the book of business, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about what it ultimately, like, what's the benefit for customers? What's the benefit for potential new customers? And I think typically what we focus on are better support and expanded resources. Ultimately, capital requirements for a large dealer group are immense. Parts are expensive, services expensive, techs are expensive. And so having expanded resources, I think, are something that we focus on a lot. Again, because of farm consolidation, farms are larger, they require more resources, they acquire more equipment, and they require ultimately bigger dealers with more resources. And so I think resources and support are what we really focus on. I think if you would talk to the average farmer or the average customer of many of our dealers, one of their primary concerns is support. How quickly are you going to be able to service my equipment? How quickly are you going to be able to get me new parts? And I think as a larger dealer group with more resources, those are really easy messaging points and pretty ubiquitous across most M&As. It's like, you grow larger, you have more resources, you have more capital, you can offer better support to larger farmers. You can offer better support to a wider group of farmers as well.
Yeah, interesting. Do you, just generally speaking, I think about the businesses that we advise, and while it's never part of a headline transaction, once you actually start talking about the book of business, customer retention, who is your target market? How are you going to blend these two different sets of customers together into an integrated go-to-market approach?
Yeah.
There's always, everybody else has the need to rationalize their existing customer list, right? There's your more profitable, strategic, important customers, and there's the customers that you maybe service them because they're carryovers from a time of scarcity when you would take any business you could ever get, or maybe you've just outgrown them, or their needs have outgrown you. At the front end of these, are you guys getting into that, talking about rationalizing customer lists and sort of using the merger as an opportunity to maybe think about who needs to be, to put it politely, transitioned off the team from a customer perspective? Or is that really more kind of day-to-day operationalizing things after the deal's done?
Yeah, I think that's more operational. I mean, again, over the last 3 or 5 years, as we've worked on more M&As, we're starting to blur the lines a little bit on what we do in terms of like, what is marketing, what is operations. I think a lot of times the lines are blurred there. Yes. But we typically, I would say, are not really involved in rationalizing those customer lists or, counseling involved in that.
Okay. And so even like absent that service set, how would you advise a client who's sitting down with you and saying, we need your help. Here's kind of why we did the transaction. We want to create some branding strategies around this. We also want to use this as an opportunity to stop talking to certain aspects of the market. Would you advise them for or against that, or is it really case by case?
I would say case by case. Again, I think that's where PR is a big play. If you do make the decision to not cut off customers, but stop prioritizing certain sets of customers or certain types of customers, I think there needs to be a communication plan around that, even if that's just sales team training or internal employee training of how do we have these conversations with customers. I think a lot of it, and this applies to a lot of different aspects of M&A, is like we talked about, internal, not only communication, but also internal training of, if a customer asks about this, how do I communicate? Or if I'm having a difficult conversation about this with a customer, how do I communicate this with them? And so I think having not only your communication plan around, okay, how do we communicate this M&A to our employees, but also how do our employees communicate this to our customers and to our market? And I think that is what I would advise if a dealer were considering, like, okay, we're going to kind of take a deep look and a hard look at our customer list and our customer base. I would heavily advise them in investing in a communication plan and a training plan for the team members that are having those conversations.
Yeah, that's wise counsel. I'm not going to ask you to tell any specific stories or call out the guilty or the innocent. But something I think is interesting is sometimes when we are brought in a little bit later in a deal process, and so maybe they're well into diligence, right? Or even they're right on the eve of signing that binding purchase agreement, and then it's going to be that sprint, sign to close sort of sprint. And now they're trying to think about integration. A big piece of what we do is we try to scope integration or keep integrations focused on the aspects of the business that actually, again, deliver those deal outcomes, right? And so, yes, there's some back office things you have to prioritize, but if you said that this is going to offer, my classic example is where these two companies together offer a better suite of full farm solutions to our grower customers. Okay, well, that ought to be one of the first things you're working on, is how do you integrate those dual suites of services. If it's the last thing you work on and they don't experience new options for a year, but meanwhile, everyone has like cool new polo shirts, your integration efforts have run afoul of why you did the deal. So all that being said, one of the first questions we ask is, okay, tell us in the simplest form why you did the transaction, right? And we may or may not want to read their marketing materials. We might just want management to tell us. And sometimes we do get some less articulate or more ambiguous reasons. Sometimes it's just a matter of they need to verbalize it, but all the facts are there. But what I'm getting at here is sometimes we come in and it's not abundantly clear outside of a small group of people why this even makes sense for the organization. And so at the point of integration where we start actually thinking about, okay, how are we going to articulate the value such that we can create an integration plan to draft on that? In your projects, do you find that when you come in to advise on help them create these transitional strategies, is the basis of the story there? Or how often are you actually working from a white piece of paper to help create a story that maybe doesn't otherwise exist? If that makes sense. We'd always love there to be a fact sheet on here's all the reasons we did it. Now help us figure out how to properly weight this and tell the market. But sometimes that fact sheet is, one bullet point says because we did it.
Yeah, I mean, typically the base of the story is there. I mean, typically the story is financial, financial related. I mean, and that is, as we've talked about, it's difficult to manipulate into a story that makes sense to tell the market. Again, like, what's the benefit to me? What's the benefit to the customer? But I would say oftentimes we're not brought in the very beginning, right? It's not when a dealer is considering doing an M&A. It's when they've already made the decision to do that. There's a deal getting close to being signed or to closing. I would say if I had to average it out, we're typically brought in 3 to 4 months before the deal is closed. And so at that point, there's typically portions of the story or pieces of the story that are put together. I would say a big part of our work is taking that story, because again, oftentimes it's not, for lack of a better word, it's not very sexy. It's not very customer facing or market facing. And there's a lot of times, a lot of manipulation that needs to be done to that story to make it make sense. And again, make it come across as a value add and a benefit to the market.
Yeah. Good news is if you came in and the story was sexy and it was polished and it had sharp corners, there wouldn't be a whole lot of work for you. So
that's true.
So keep the stories rough, people. But kind of on that, then I guess a related question, Andrew, and kind of bring us more towards the end here. You want to tell a good story. You also need to tell a differentiated story. And I'm way out ahead of my ski tips here because I'm not a marketing professional at all. Yeah. Anybody who's listened to this for even more than 5 minutes knows that that's true. But I'm going to oversimplify. But as you said, there's a pretty narrow distribution of reasons that companies, particularly ag dealers, do deals. You just said that a lot of them are very financially driven. And given that, what do people need to think about? Or maybe how do you approach the challenge of telling a story that's authentic and it's meaningful and it is ostensibly different when many of the underlying reasons for doing it are fairly familiar and predictable?
It's a great question. And I think it's a difficult question. And I think it sometimes varies on a case-by-case basis, because I think different dealers have different value adds to their community. Different dealer groups have different capabilities and different things that they focus on as a dealer group. I would say ultimately it's focusing on transparency, honesty, accountability. It's like the average consumer and the average customer can sense when they're being fed some BS. So like they know what the rationale for the M&A is. And so I think most of the time we advise, don't hide the reason you're doing it. Everybody, like you said, everybody knows. It's not hidden. I think the average consumer knows that it's financially motivated. So we're obviously not going to focus on that. And we kind of will transform, I would say, financially motivated into additional support and additional resources. Again, it's manipulating that into like, what is the benefit for the consumer? And again, those are the things we typically focus on. And I think weaving in the unique legacy and heritage of the brands that are being merged or the brand that's being acquired. I think that oftentimes is the biggest focus for the consumer. Is like, I worked with John for 30 years. Like, he's been my salesperson. And so they want to make sure like, okay, John's still going to be there. We're still keeping the service. We're still keeping the values of the organization and of the family that had this dealer group. But again, there's additional support. There's additional resources. I think from a differentiation perspective, it just ultimately depends on the dealer group. Oftentimes, dealers have various things that differentiate them from other dealers in the area. And so I think we typically try to pinpoint and kind of nail down, okay, what is your differentiator? We focus on that. Oftentimes, that's actually really useful when a dealer is acquiring across the nation or in an entirely different geography, because they may have resources, they may bring capabilities that that area or that market has never had before, because that dealer group is from an entirely different region of the US or of the nation. So I would say at a high level, again, it varies. A lot of this varies pretty significantly, but to generalize things, I would say that's what we focus on typically.
I think that's a fair answer. So if the why is not differentiated, just be transparent about the why, but it's not the heart of the story. It's perhaps the opening salvo in the story. Mm-hmm. You're clear about the why, and then you differentiate on the benefit. Mm-hmm. Differentiate on why people should be excited about it. In doing so, you make sure you honor the brands, both the surviving entity as well as the entities that are now becoming part of that newer or larger pre-existing brand. And then, to our earlier point, you balance the internal and the external, because communicating very well to only half of them is still going to give you some pretty destructive results and outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Anything we missed today, Andrew?
I don't think so. No.
Fantastic. Well, we are going to make sure that we have information for both you and for Root+Beta in the show notes. Awesome. But I just wanted to say thank you very much for taking the time. Andrew has a new addition at home to the family, which makes scheduling fickle and challenging and sleep at a premium. And so I don't take for granted the fact that you carved out the time to do this, Andrew. Thank you.
Of course. No, I enjoyed the conversation and happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in to today's episode of the Pacesetter Pod. A very quick reminder before we go to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And to continue the conversation, you can find me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn, or you can check out the links in the show notes to set up a call with me directly on our website. Thanks again, and I look forward to having you join us next time.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.